Mhm. All righty, there she is, Venerable Maria or Soledad Santurjo Santos. Her full name, Carlos. Maria Consuelo. Her given name, Maria Consuelo Soledad Santurjo Santos. But her name in religious life is Venerable Soledad or Maria Soledad. Okay? Pearl of the Antilles. The Antilles are in the Caribbean. As I told you before, Mr. Reed, I don't know why. I didn't check it during the break. I didn't check to see why it's called the Antilles. But anyways, it's the Caribbean islands, and Puerto Rico's in the Caribbean. So that's where she's from. Okay? Venerable. So she's at the second stage on her way. She was born in 1892 and died in 1973. So as we know, she was made an American citizen in 1917. So she was an American citizen, or died an American citizen, although she was not born one. And as you can see, Arecibo, Puerto Rico. Puerto Rican descent, holy woman. She entered the religious order, as again, also I think can see from her picture. She's wearing a veil and a habit, the uniform of the Servants of Mary, Ministers of the Sick. The Servants of Mary, Ministers of the Sick, or to the sick, I should say. She entered them when she was 16, so a young woman. That's apparently what she wanted to do with her life, and that's what she did for the rest of her life. She was in a number of leadership positions in the order, Puerto Rico and Cuba, when she went to Spain for a bit. She was in Cuba during the revolution and the communist revolution, which was atheistic, so they either closed down the churches, or they certainly expelled religious orders, what they considered foreign elements and stuff like that. So she had to go back to Puerto Rico in the 60s. Nevertheless, she was a good woman. She had a heart attack in later life, or near the end of her life, which kind of compromised her ability to do stuff. But she still served the community. She would sew clothes for the other nuns and certainly pray every day, talk to God and help out the sick, which is the ministry of the order. Okay? Servants to the sick, yes? And then it's at age 80 in 1973, she died in San Juan in Puerto Rico. And it says here on the website from a pulmonary edema. And I know some of you are in I guess, if you have to take anatomy for a radiologic technician, you do? Okay. And I might have some nursing students as well. I don't know. I know I have it in another class. But anyways, is an edema a bruise? Is that just a fancy name for a bruise? Ah? Oh, so that's what an edema is. Okay. So she had a pulmonary edema, which means she had swelling on the heart. So I guess that the heart had difficulty beating then. I'm assuming. Okay. So that's what she died of. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Oh, a hematoma is a bruise, right? Ah, there we go. I should be a doctor. Yeah. Well, I am a doctor. So I always want to be around when they say, someone has a problem and they say, we need a doctor. We need a doctor. And just come over and start working on the person. So are you a doctor? Yes, I am. My medicine is a little bit different than yours, but but anyways, focus is on prayer. Anyway, so I asked for Venerable Maria Soledad's prayers for us and for people in the area. I know she's not from Florida, but pray for the people in Florida, please, Venerable Maria Soledad, that especially the people who died, or people died, and that they may rest in peace, and for the people who are suffering, please pray for them, and pray for all of us too. We do well in the course. Okie dokie. I wanted to apologize to Mr. O'Neill and Ms. McGowan. When I was talking about Galatians last time, I forgot to include you amongst the Celts. I think I mentioned Ms. Donnelly, but I forgot to mention you guys as well. And I don't know if we have any other Irish people here, but they're people of Celtic background, but I felt badly about it. I wanted to... I see you. Nah. All right. Dr. Dunn was going to talk about revelation and inspiration. And I will. I'll talk about it next week. Oh, please remember we don't have class on Tuesday next week. It's the fall break. So next Tuesday, no class here or online. So take that, enjoy yourselves, and we'll see Thursday. On Thursday, I will talk about revelation and inspiration, but I was taking notes for it, and I didn't have time to make a PowerPoint or whatever, so I thought I'd just skip over that and come back to it if that's okay. If it's not okay, well then, say so on the student evaluation. Say that annoyed you or something. I apologize for that. But I'm going to move on to the next one, which is encountering the sacred writings in the community, tradition and magisterium. We already talked about scriptures, okay? And this is, I think, this is sources of authority. This is another, I put this PowerPoint up on campus. Did you see it? Did you see it on campus? Huh? You can check if you want. I just want to let you know it's on there. It is, yeah, it's on there. But I just don't want you to be confused because it says sources of authority. That's fine. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel every time this is from another class on the Christian faith, and I'm covering the same material, so I don't see a need to absolutely redo everything. Maybe I should and will in the future, but I'm not going to do that now. Because here I am. Here we are. Okay? Buckle up, Ms. Bolton, Sources of authority. So, in every religion, and I think, and not even a religious reality, just the natural world. I mean, people write things and people say things. A person can start out talking about their views, and maybe eventually they get written down, especially if they're interesting or something. Other people might write them down, or the person himself or herself might write them down. It just seems natural. People give speeches. People might also write books. All right. No different for any religious figure and stuff like that. Although, as I told you before, for most of human history, and still in many cultures, the primary focus is on orality, on speaking and speech, and writing is secondary. But that's how you transmit knowledge. I mean, I'm not giving you anything written here. I'm speaking to you. It's going into your brain and it's being processed and you're hopefully understanding. Yes, Mr. Plains, don't place any bets. I'm just kidding. Because I don't always understand what I'm saying. Anyways, so we have the same thing in religion. We talked about sacred writings. We're encountering sacred writings, but in those writings, you're always encountering the words of people that they spoke. They told these stories, and they eventually got written down. As far as we know, they were not just written down out of nothing. Like someone just decided one day to sit down and start with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Oh, that's a good opening line. Yeah, that's pretty good. It's going to be a bestseller, Miss Bells. No, probably these were stories passed on, people talking around the campfire or to each other or during religious events and stuff. And eventually someone wrote them down. So we have sacred writings. But the stories are handed on. They're passed on. Tradition. So we're always kind of encountering any sacred writings within a community. And that was the point of the article that hopefully you looked, or the essay, I should say, that you looked at from, Kevin Hooser? Kevin Hooser, I think I asked a couple questions about him on the quiz. Maybe you got it, maybe you didn't. Yes? You did?
I didn't.
Okay.
No, I was saying, did I get it, or if I remember watching it?
Do you remember, do you remember the reading? Okay. From the quiz. You don't remember the reading from the reading itself? Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to stop digging. I don't have too much knowledge. I don't want to know anymore, Mr. Kettner. Okay, anyway, no, you're fine. But anyways, if you read that, I thought it was an interesting essay because he makes that exact point, that you're always dealing with a social reality, even when you're writing, if you're as a writer, but also as a reader, because you're not just dealing with the person writing, you're dealing with the whole community that made the writing possible. It didn't come from anywhere, I don't think. I mean, it's possible that a sacred writing could just magically appear fully complete, fully written. Can't think of any religion that claims that, though, but I don't think it's plausible. I could be wrong, but when I find a Bible in the hotel room, I think somebody placed it, or a Book of Mormon, depending on which hotel chain you're in. So we're dealing with a community, the people who told the stories, the people who decided to write them down. So that's an encounter. We're dealing with persons. Remember, an encounter is between persons. So we're encountering persons in the sacred writings. So I'm just looking at one variety of how we're encountering them. In the sacred writing, you're encountering the writing itself, but don't worry about this. What I want to talk here about is what we call sacred tradition. Sacred writings and sacred tradition, or handing on. Tradere, tradidi, traditum in Latin means to hand on or to pass something on. Worry about this, don't worry about that. Again, there we go. That's what I want. So that's why, I talk about the church, or I've talked about the church. I define the church for you, yes? I think I give you a definition of the church. Yes, no? Not in this class? No? Because one class blends into the other, teaching the same thing, you forget. The church, it's basically the community of believers in Jesus Christ. It's a specialized term for the community in Christianity that believes in Jesus Christ. Other religions have names for their communities as well. But it's the assembly. That's all it really means. The assembled group is what the word church means in Greek when they talk about themselves as the early Christians. We're the assembled group of believers in Christ who have received baptism. Okay? So it's belief in baptism, the church, the community. Okay? The community is saving time, so hopefully you can read this. The name for the community of those, and it might happen, who believe in Jesus Christ and have received baptism. See, it's not enough to just have belief. For some Christians it is, but for the ancient churches, no, that's not been what the tradition, that's not what's been handed on. Coming from Jesus, there was a an initiation rite that Jesus started. Well, he didn't start it; he actually took it from Judaism and have received baptism, called baptism or dunking in water, immersion. That's all the word baptism means. It means to dunk in water, immerse in water, and that comes from Jesus. Jesus took that from Judaism. It's part of the practice of the Jews. When a person converted to Judaism, part of the process was you take them to a pool of water, you would dunk them in the water 3 times, interestingly enough, while they said a prayer. And there are also some other things, like if you're a man, you had to be circumcised, obviously not with a woman. You also had to make a promise to observe the law. You accepted the burden or the yoke of the law of Moses as your way of life. And it had to be done in front of witnesses who could verify that you did it properly. And then you were a Jew. You were considered a Jew from that time on. Your children would be considered Jews. Is that an apple, Mr. O'Neill? Is that an apple? Ooh, very nice. Very nice. I like apples. Hey, Mr. Marita? I like a lot of things, Mr. Marita. Well, I don't like broccoli. So it wasn't just enough that the people followed Jesus and believed in him. He would require them to be immersed in water. Because, Jesus was a Jew. He wasn't, again, talking about reinventing the wheel. He didn't reinvent the wheel. He did what was normal to him as a Jew. Okay? This was the initiation into his community, which came to be called the church. I mean, Jesus probably didn't use that word or have necessarily any specific word, but that's what the group starts calling itself, the assembly. We're the assembly of Christ, of Christian believers. Okay? And they pass on, trado, they hand on, in a manner of speaking, the stories about Jesus that they're telling, which eventually get written down. So that's why when you read Dei Verbum, and hopefully you will in a few weeks, from the Second Vatican Council, the whole, in the beginning section, they talk about the relationship between the sacred writings and this idea of handing on. There is really, the sacred writings really comes out of the tradition. It's handed on, and then it gets written down. The sacred writings don't come first. I know in our introduction to Christianity, maybe the sacred writings, kind of perceive that they get handed on to you first, because that's what you maybe remember. You're in CCD or you're in youth group or whatever at church, and they open your Bible, they give you a Bible, But then if you think about it, you already came into that building or that area or that group of people with knowledge of Jesus, right? You didn't come in blank. I mean, if your parents were Christian or Catholic, not necessarily the same thing, Mr. Marita. Say. I think it's funny, Mr. Plains, so I'll laugh with myself and my guardian angel. Well, he ain't laughing either. So, all right. Sorry, Felix. Anyways. But I mean, if your parents, your parents probably weren't atheists who decided to send you to a church group or something like that, or the, Confraternity of Christian Doctrine, CCD, to learn the faith. They probably had a reason they wanted you to go there. They were probably Christian themselves. So you already knew something about, there was this guy, Jesus. Maybe you knew some prayers even or stuff, even though you didn't know a lot maybe. But you already had received tradition before even someone maybe said, oh yeah, there's this book called the Bible, so start looking at this. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, we knew, the major stories, like the good Lord tomorrow, but not, the intricate stuff.
Yeah, you know the plot.
Yeah.
you know about the cross and the empty tomb, and stuff like that. Maybe you've heard about Noah and his ark and stuff like that. But so yeah, you've already heard some things before someone actually gave you a book. I think that's the most natural way that it happens. So you're already being taught by the community before you encounter the sacred writings. You're already, in a way, encountering the sacred writings in the community, in the stories that are handed on. So really, Scripture, in a manner of speaking, comes out of tradition. Ultimately, the tradition is about the source, which for us, in the case of sacred writings, remember, is ultimate reality. Yes, they're pointers to ultimate reality. So for any religion, sacred writings or even just sacred tradition is based in the source of where it says it comes from. For Christianity, that's Christ, Jesus, who is the ultimate revelation of God. What does that mean? I'll talk about that next week when I talk about Revelation. But he is the ultimate unveiling of God for Christians and for Judaism as well. Okay? So this is what's being handed on. The church, it's not just a matter of handing on propositions, teachings thou shalt not kill, or, don't have sex if you're not married, other rules. We're propositional things. God is one God in three persons. One divine nature actuated as three persons, or existing as three persons. And that's part of religion. But it's more a way of life. It's living. You live the message. You live the beliefs that eventually get written down. And that's why when you're reading the Bible, some, they might not always speak to you because they're writing down things about God or Jesus or just moral living that were important to the person who was living them at the time. What did I tell you about the letters of St. Paul? Why did he write most of his letters? What was the purpose behind his writing of most of his letters? What do you remember? I want to take a shot. Mr. Plage.
I guess it was the sent letters to the different churches in the area.
Okay. What to the different churches in the area?
Revelation.
Good, okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess he was revealing things to them in a way, or God was revealing stuff to them. Why do you think he felt the need to even write to these churches? I mean, he deposited the message with them, he preached to them, baptized some of them, and why was he writing back to them?
They were being naughty.
Yes. They were naughty Christians, weren't they? Sometimes they were very naughty. They were very naughty. Like in 1 Corinthians, he has to take the local Christians to task because they have a guy who's living with his mother. And I don't mean he's just a loser. I mean, I can say I'm living with my mother, so there you go. I speak from experience. No, he was having sexual relations with his mother. It was incestuous. And the local church community didn't seem to have a problem with that. They were saying, hey brother, maybe that's, not the way you should be living your life. We have the teachings of Moses, you're not supposed to sleep with your mother or your family members, revelation of God there, the church does Jesus, all these things, and the person's like, nope, I don't care. I'm going to still sleep with my mom. We're in love. And Paul writes them a letter and says, no, you throw this person out. You throw them out of the church. You give his flesh over to Satan. Those are some harsh words. That tells you how angry Paul was over it. Because Jesus is about love and mercy, right? Who am I to judge? I'm not Jesus. Who am I to judge a fellow Christian who's doing something wrong? Well, Paul felt he could judge. Throw him out. He says, I hear that there are things going on amongst you in the Corinthian church that are worse even than the pagans do. Even than the pagans think what you're doing is disgusting. Incest it's an old taboo. It's one of the primordial taboos of a lot of human cultures. Even the pagans who are supposed to be worshiping idols and stuff, they think you're disgusting. Throw him out. Yeah, usually there were problems. That's why he had to write to them. Not because he just thought, oh, you know what? There's this story about Jesus I forgot to tell them. Maybe they'd like to know about it. No, that usually wasn't the problem. So it's the life of the church. Are you living? And your life can distort your reading then of the sacred writings. As it was distorting, at least from Paul's view. Now, you might not have a problem with incest. I don't know. I am not judging. People have different opinions, especially nowadays with polyamory and all sorts of stuff. Who knows? But they did. Paul did, and they're claiming to be Christians and followers of Christ, and the church did, and church told them this, and they still wouldn't listen. So he felt he had to bring down the hammer, use his authority to bring down the hammer on them, because and their lifestyle was distorting how they were reading the scriptures. They weren't only reading what they wanted to read, and the other stuff they didn't have to accept because they didn't agree with it, apparently. So the scriptures are challenging. Sacred writings can be challenging to us. Yes, they come from another culture that we're encountering. And sometimes that culture can be wrong. That culture can be naive or, have blinders on and stuff like that. But sometimes the culture is saying something that's an eternal truth, even confirmed by God. That, this is the fulfilling way to live. Don't sleep with your parents. Parents shouldn't be having sex with their children. Anyways, you'd think that would be obvious, but it's not always obvious. So to hand on, pass along. Okay, where is sacred tradition found? Well, as I said, it's found in the life of the church. So church councils, which I've mentioned. Okay, meetings, official meetings of bishops, where they have to decide issues. When the sacred writings themselves are not necessarily clear about what Christians are to believe or how they're supposed to act about something. Okay? You have to have an encounter, a real encounter. People come together to talk to each other. Right? And try to work it out. What do you think about incest? Well, I think this. Well, I'm not down with it, but I can see how it can happen. You might take a middle of the road position, and then someone might be like, oh yeah, incest, baby! Let's put it on the books. It'd be more of a liberal persuasion. But okay, but you talk about it because now we have this problem, maybe, and maybe the sacred writings themselves are not clear. So then we have to look at what we've received, what have we been told, and is it still valid for us? Is it something that was just provisional? Was just a cultural thing, like women have to be subject to men, under their thumb and under their control? That's in the Bible in some places. or at least that's assumed that that's the relationship that should be. Is that a cultural thing, a social thing? Or is that something that God's saying, yeah, this is the way the relationship should be? We have to determine that. We might have to have a council, an actual encounter, a meeting of minds and persons. Other persons, church fathers, also church mothers, but we don't really have any writings from any of the early Christian women. Speaking of male and female relations, women weren't normally, there were some women in the ancient world, but we have writings from, but usually not. But so the church fathers, they were all men. Who are people? They're Christians from the early centuries of Christianity who passed on their ideas about what the sacred writings mean, what the beliefs of Christianity mean, how it should be lived. And they were usually, most of them are saints, I should say many of them are saints, not all of them are saints, but they were usually good and holy and sincere people. So they have that kind of authority in the church. And they're called church fathers. So they're like spiritual fathers for us. They hand on ideas, that Christians have thought about when they've meditated and thought about the sacred writings that have come down to us. So we encounter them in their writings that they've left us, have been passed on. And then finally, action, the church's liturgy, which is also an encounter. People come together to worship. Even if you're worshiping alone, if you're praying using your own prayers and stuff like that, that's one thing. But, sometimes, or maybe a lot of times, you might have a prayer book or something, a little devotional that you might read from, might have a little meditation for the day, or even just a little prayer book with prayers that you say at the beginning of the morning, at the end of the night, or during the day, whatever, Well, someone had to write that book for you. The prayers come from somewhere. Someone had to think them up. So already now you're encountering the person in that writing. But liturgy, you go to a building with other people usually. You're usually not the only one there. Even for the priest. The priest, they can't have private masses. Priests can say mass privately with no one else present. The angels are present. It's Jacoby, You're never truly truly alone. But the church does not prefer that. That's not the norm, and in the rules they try to say, you can't have a private mass, but it shouldn't be normal, there should be a community present of other people. Liturgy, which means public worship. Just give you I thought I gave you, when we talked about Vatican I, right? I gave you the definition for council, didn't I? I think on that PowerPoint.
I think so.
You don't think so? You don't think so either? Well, here it is here. Here, council. You have it. From two Latin words, cum, which means with, together, callo, to call. So something that's called together. You call people together. You convoke a convocation. So a council in the religious sense, the Christian religious sense, the Catholic Christian religious sense, is a meeting of bishops, church leadership, decide matters of teaching, what we believe, and how we are to act, discipline. So again, you see that interrelation between what you think about, what you believe, and then how you act, your living, how you live what you say you believe. This is a picture of the last council. I think I mentioned Vatican II. But the last council in Vatican II in the 60s, all the bishops were stuffed into St. Peter's Basilica. They all were a couple thousand, I forget exactly how many. I wonder how comfortable that was to sit there on those benches that they brought in. I don't know. Just crammed in like sardines. Anyways. So, an actual meeting, a council, okay? Coming together, calling together. Then the church fathers, here's your definition for them. The period of the church fathers dates from the 1st century AD until the 700s AD. Okay? And you don't have to know who they are, but, just in case you're curious, the 1st century usually the time of the church fathers. One of the first church fathers is a man called Clement of Rome, who was a bishop of the city of Rome. Usually is considered to start with him, Clement the First of Rome, Saint Clement. And it usually ends in the 700s with a man named Saint John of Damascus, or Saint John Damascene. That's through the Easterner. In the West, I'm trying to remember who it is in the West that they usually end it with. I want to say Isidore of Seville, but I might be wrong. But anyways, I'll just go with John of Damascus. John of Damascus in the 700s. Now, tradition, I've been using this word, but I want you to understand it properly. It's not, let me give liturgy. Let me finish liturgy before I move on. Sorry about that. Yeah, Pope St. Clement, 99 AD. There's a picture of him. And then John of Damascus, who died in 749, picture of him. Okay. The liturgy. Liturgy means the church's public worship. Literally, it means a work of the people. Laos means people in Greek. Ergon means a work, So, like back in the 90s and maybe the 2000s, there's this big push for ergonomics. Here's an ergonomic chair to sit on at offices. They want people to sit in ergonomic chairs. Just sitting in a traditional chair was bad for your spine or bad for your hips or whatever. I'm sorry, but those ergonomic chairs, they were like torture racks. Have you ever sat on some of these things? They have no back to them. Just like a seat, and then you like wrap your legs around it, and so you never seen it. Well, God bless you. They've gone the way of the dinosaur because they were junk. They were garbage. Ergonomics was a big thing. Work, help you work. Functional. Ergon, work. And you had ergonomic mice for your computers. I remember my brother had one of them that you couldn't. It wasn't a regular mouse that traditional mouse. It was like this flat thing that. For where you stuck your finger, for the indentations for your fingers. It was terrible. I hated using it. It was awful. An ergonomic mouse. Usually when something's called ergonomic, it's exactly the opposite. It doesn't conform to the human body at all. But anyways. So liturgy, an ergon is a work. And the word work was also specific, had a sacred meaning in Greek as well. A work for a god, performed a sacrifice or a work for a god. So, the Christians were, it's a public work, yes. So it could be like building a building or something, but it can also mean offering a sacrifice to a god. So the work of the people, what is the work of the people of the church? It's worshiping God. It's honoring God. And part of that, and coming together to do that in a community. So there's an encounter going on. But the way you encounter God is through the ritual, true. So you have a reenactment of the last meal Jesus had with his disciples, his followers. That's part of it, usually part of it. Not all Christians do that. Certainly in Catholic churches, it's a major part of the liturgy, the worship ceremony. But before you get to that, you have the encounter with God through the sacred writings. They're read to you. You don't just read them, they're spoken to you. So again, that oral element, Ms. McGowan, that oral element is still primary. It's not enough. They don't just have Bibles in the pews and the priest says, okay, open your Bible to page such and such and read this, and then I'll talk about it for a little bit. No, it's proclaimed to you. It's spoken to you. That's important. That's part of the encounter. And it's also part of the encounter that it is explained to you. It's not just you sitting there meditating. Maybe you are sitting there thinking, but it's, the religious leadership, the priest, the deacon, the bishop, takes the time, hopefully, to expound, to expatiate, Ms. Burton, on the scriptures, on the sacred writing, to tell you verbally what they think it means, or the church means, and pass on, again, what the message is, what the story is, and its meaning. You can't do that. I'll get to that in a moment. You can't do that simply with a book. If it's just you and the book. Remember what I said before? Like that was like I mentioned before, Plato's whole problem. And a lot of the problem in the ancient world amongst the Greeks with writing was that you can't interrogate the author. You can't ask the author what he means. All you have are words. They didn't see an encounter there. But with sacred writings, there is an encounter. God, the belief is that the God, in our case, the Holy Spirit, if you're a Christian, God, the Holy Spirit, moves in the words, speaks through them to you, gives you insight, more like insights, indications from maybe a phrase or a word that's in the text. Maybe it's not the whole thing. Or maybe the whole tenor of the story tells you something, you know? It might not be the specific details. So when I'm talking about tradition, I just want to say this before I want to make it clear. We're not talking about habits or customs. These are traditions. I mean, how these guys are dressed up, you know, they're bishops, they wear big pointy hats, which they probably took from Roman clothing 2,000 years ago. That's probably how like the Roman priests would dress. And they wear long robes and they wear capes. They wear different colors depending on what their position is. They're carrying a bishop's hat for the Pope. But the Pope is also a ruler of Vatican City, so he has a crown. So they're here, the papal tiara, it's called. They're carrying the papal crown. And they're marching into St. Peter's Basilica for Vatican II, for one of the sessions. It might be the first session, actually. But, this is all traditional. It's habitual. I mean, they could be walking in business suits with one, right? They could look... No? Maybe. Personally, I love the bling, but that's just me. I'm just a sucker for a man in uniform. Anyway. But they could just be wearing business suits, coming in, and they'd still be bishops. There would be nothing different, They don't have to wear any kind of hat. These are all customs. They're habits. Okay, when they went into the council was held in Latin. That's how they gave their speeches and stuff like that. They didn't give their speeches in Italian or English or French or whatever. The common language was Latin, a dead language, but it was the common language that they understood, so they could all communicate. That's a tradition, They didn't have to do it. They don't do it anymore. They change. Traditions can change. You have habits and customs, things that are handed on that you do, which you don't necessarily have to do anymore. This is not what sacred tradition is. Let me be clear about that. We're not talking about sacred habits or customs. We're talking about tradition is as I said, it's the church's experience of God. It's an experience of God that's being handed on. So it's something deeply serious and important. Okay? And it can't change, or it can develop, which is a kind of change, but it can't be changed, like you're saying X and not X. One day you say this is X, and then the next day you say this is not X. Like if the church said, well, traditionally we believe that there's a God, but now we don't believe there's a God anymore. Surprise! So I don't want you to be confused about that, because people can oftentimes be confused about that, because they'll think because customs and habits change, that's the same thing as sacred tradition changing. Because I remember when I was a young kid, I always loved religion and stuff like that, and I would write to different Protestant groups and stuff like that. I get literature in the mail, and some of them were quite conservative, and some of them were not very fond of the Catholic Church. So I get some anti-Catholic literature that was saying, the Catholic Church is evil, it's the Antichrist, and it's changed all its teachings. Oh, really? They didn't tell me that at church. They hid that from me, Ms. Belts. What else is the church hiding from me? So I looked to see, okay, what teachings have they changed? And it'd be like, they give dates, they'd be like 4th century AD. Church starts using candles at Mass. Okay. 5th century AD. church changes from using Greek at the liturgy to using Latin only. Ooh, this is getting deeper, you know. 10th century, priests are required to not have sex. They have to be celibate. Okay. These are all customs and traditions. These are, and if you don't know any better, then you think like, I know, I shouldn't harass my students. I'm sorry. If you don't know any better, you might think, oh, wow, that might scare you and stuff like that. But yeah, the customs and culture, they're all cultural things. They changes, language, the dress that people wear, whether you use candles or electrical lights during Mass, whatever. These all change. They're not teachings. It would have been more devastating if it had been like, the 4th century AD, church decides that Jesus is God, and he wasn't before. He wasn't taught that. Then that would be serious. That's foundational. But whether you call a priest father or call a bishop pope or something, that's, to me, that's not going to destroy my faith necessarily. Even then, as a young kid, I was like, really? That's all you got? I could see that distinction. So I just don't want you to make that same mistake. Oop, hold on. Tradition is for us in encountering Christian sacred writings and in the Bible while you're reading the Bible, which has been handed on to us, okay, in a particular way, okay, and there's some, not all Christians agree. Remember, I talked about the Deuterocanon and some went somewhat into the history of the creation of the Bible or which books should be in the Bible. Jews had a particular view of what they would accept, what should be received. The Christians had a different view, and even amongst the Christians, there were maybe some disagreements. Then later on, with Protestant Christians in the 1500s, they went back to what the Jews decided and took out a bunch of books, or no longer accepted them as part of their sacred writings. And the church had to reaffirm her belief in these sacred writings. Now I have to figure out where I was going with that, Mr. Plange. I'd say I need a vacation, but I don't work hard enough to need a vacation. I'm really not. I'm a very lazy person, extremely lazy. Well, no, that's overstating. That's overcompensating. I'm lazy. I'm not extremely lazy, but I have my moments. But this was what was passed on. The church didn't change it. The church didn't say like, oh, okay, these Protestant Christians are correct, and the Jews are correct. No, because they took what they had received from Jesus and through the apostles, through the religious authorities of the church. Okay? It was not a habit that they could just change. It was their lived memory of what Christ did and what the apostles, his followers, earliest followers did and said were important. And the church can't just change that, because you would be changing the encounter that you're having with Christ then. It would be a different version of Jesus that you're encountering now. If you took out all these books like Tobit and Judith and the Maccabees and stuff like that, or books from the New Testament and stuff, you wouldn't have the same Jesus. It would be a different encounter. Some Christians tried to do that. Early in the church, in the 200s AD, you had a heresy, a false, what's considered a false teaching. Of course, they didn't consider it false. The heretics didn't consider it false. They thought they were right. It was called Marcionism, or the Marcionites. Is it itism or Marcionism? Marcionites is the Marcionite heresy. In the 3rd century AD, there was this guy, Marcion, who was a Christian, and he had a particular view of God. He believed that there were two gods. He was a Gnostic, actually. I told you about the Gnostics. He shared that view of reality, that there were two views of reality. The material world was created by an evil God, and hence the material world was evil, but the spiritual world was created by a good God who was good. And that we were spiritual entities that were trapped in matter. Okay, so that was bad. We were in prison in a way. We had to get out of our prison. And so you wanted a relationship with the good God, who was identified as the God of the New Testament. But the bad God, the evil God, was that angry, nasty God of the Jews in the Old Testament. So, well, what do? I mean, because you had tradition. You had the Jewish sacred writings were accepted by Jesus and the apostles. They came into the church, accepted. You also had these writings in the New Testament. Well, you get rid of them. You get rid of the Jewish Old Testament because it's the evil God, the angry, nasty, mean, vengeful God. Not the God of love, the true God, the good God of the New Testament. Okay, so the Marcionites got rid of the Old Testament, all of it. Not just the Deuterocanon, but all of it in their Bible. But then you had the New Testament. Well, the New Testament was written by Jews too, who believed in the God of the Old Testament that's written about in the Old Testament. Certainly Jesus did. Well, what do you do with that? Well, Marcion decided that even in the New Testament writings, some of them were too Jewish. They were still too aligned with that evil God of the Old Testament. So Gospels like the Gospel of Matthew, which is very Jewish. No, we can't have that. Got rid of that. Got rid of Mark. Got rid of John. John was considered too Jewish. Some of the letters of St. Paul were too Jewish. Got rid of those. And so he constructed, his group constructed their own New Testament of just the Gospel of Luke, which again was still too Jewish in some elements. They had to edit out stuff. It was too Jewish. And then a handful of letters of Paul. Okay? That was some of the background of why the church had to start making lists of her canon. You couldn't just, and this tells you something about how things work. And how things work, I guess, in the case of how the sacred writings come together, and how the church works. There was a problem, Mr. Plain. There was a problem. The church had to deal with a problem. The Marcionites, who also the Jews in the first century. But here were Christians who were, getting rid of all of the Jewish writings from the Old Testament, and even it was affecting the New Testament. So that's why you start to have lists where the authorities of the church have to come together in councils and start telling people, no, this is what the books we do receive, and you should receive them as well. Why? Because they've been handed on that way, Ms. McGowan. Tradere. Tradidy. They were passed on. Not because someone wrote something down or because you could tell from the writings themselves that they were inspired. 9 times out of 10, they don't say they're inspired. They don't come with a little stamp, saying inspired writing you're about to read. It was what was handed on. It was the memory of the church about what they received, about Jesus. So we're talking about two kinds of memory here. The scriptures are a written memory. So you're encountering the memory of the church in writing. So it's like a snapshot in a way. If you look at a person's snapshot, you're encountering the person, even though you're not really, just a picture. But that's kind of like what the Bible is, a picture book. And then you have tradition, which is the living of that memory. Okay, what does that picture tell us, and what does it mean? How does it motivate us? How do we understand it? Okay. Now, in understanding it, we have to have, I would think, this also seems logical to me, interpreters, people who help us to understand it. We can try to understand it on our own, and maybe we can understand it on our own to some extent. But in many religions and any group of people, you get experts that develop in the area who can help you explain and understand the writing. And the same thing happens in Christianity and in the church. Yeah. And so we have this idea, finally, of magisterium. Magisterium. Just a fancy word for the teaching authority of the church. And that's the word they use, I think, in Dei Verbum when you read it. I don't think they say magisterium. I think they translate it as teaching authority. So that's what they're talking about, or teaching office. So that's what they're talking about in Dei Verbum from Vatican II when you eventually read it. They're talking about the magisterium, the teaching authority. Magister means a teacher. Letting people out early? Come on, man. I'm going to keep you to the bitter end, Mr. Plange. Yes, well, I've got you, Mr. Marita. I will keep a grip on you to the end. A gentle grip. Who's looking at it? It's cold? Really?
It's because I'm really easy.
I'm usually hot when I'm in here, but yeah, it's not. Oh, sorry. Well, we're getting to the end, sir. Don't worry. We're moving along. So the Magisterium, it's the name for the teaching office of the church by which she authentically interprets God's revealing of himself. And most importantly, I would say, more importantly, ensures that the community is faithful to it. So that the way that the church, it's kind of like quality control, you know? Like when you have United States Department of Agriculture inspectors come around, the USDA to inspect meat and stuff like that, Quality control, make sure that someone's not selling rotten meat to the public. Hey, one hopes. But then you have outbreaks of salmonella and you wonder how well they're doing the job. So quality control, basically, is what the Magisterium is all about. Authenticity. The word magister is, the root of it is magis in Latin, which means to be greater or higher than someone else. It's also what rabbi means, by the way. So the same kind of concept. Rav means to be great or high. So, when you say magister, or talk about someone as a teacher, literally it's like my higher one, or your highness, I guess you could say, in a way. My greater one is what it literally means. But anyways, we'll go with teacher or master. That's how we also have master. All right. So there are special members of any community, okay, and certainly of the church, which have been designated to have the power and the authority, the role amongst the general followers to say what the beliefs mean. Not just the beliefs that have been passed on, but the written beliefs. What do they mean? Okay, because the written beliefs are not always clear. It can say, when you read the Gospels or something like that, and Jesus talks about himself as being the Son and God is his Father. Well, okay, fine. I understand the words. I understand the relationship. It's usually stating a biological relationship. Okay, a father and son relationship. Gametes are involved, Yeah. But I also know from English usage and from human usage, people can talk about other people as their sons or their children in a metaphorical way. They're not biologically related at all, but they have a certain kind of maybe spiritual or emotional bond. Or something like that, or even a cultural bond, for example, like in Asian cultures, Korean culture and stuff like that. Though usually a person will call an older person grandpa or grandma or something, whether they're related or not, or mother or father and stuff like that. Again, whether they're related or not, that's the cultural custom. So what does Jesus mean by using that? Because you might say, well, the word's obvious. Well, I just pointed out to you, it's not obvious. It should be obvious. I guess if you go drill back into the word and its origin, I wasn't there when someone came up with the word, when language started. But I guess if I drill back into the history of the word, it would have to, I guess, be a biological relationship. Someone had to come up with a word for the thing that came out of his woman, that he thinks he created from her after they had sex. And the same thing for the woman. She has to come up with a word for this thing that comes out of her, male or female or whatever, through pregnancy. What does Jesus mean it that way? Is Jesus talking about God like he's his biological father? Like now God is not spirit, but he's physical. Like God has sex with something, I guess a goddess, and produces children. Well, my doctor's calling me. Dr. Szyminski. Well, that's because I missed my appointment the other day. I don't even know why I'm going to see him. I got to call him back because I missed the appointment. Uh-oh, sorry. Come on. Hang up. Sorry about that. No, nothing's wrong. It's just a regular checkup. That's why I don't know why I'm going to see him. I don't really need to. I mean, I have a suspicion why, but Anywho, where was I? Oh, yeah. So, I mean, is that Jesus' conception of God? That he's saying, yeah, I'm really a child of God. I'm really a son of God. That, I was born by Mother Goddess in the spiritual realm. Okay. Does he mean it, that there's another connection, like God is the source of his existence, like a father to a son? Okay. Does he mean it simply metaphorically, that, God loves me? It's another way of saying God loves me and cares for me. I'm like his child. Okay. Jesus never defines it. So how do I figure it out? And I can't ask Jesus. He's not here for me to ask. I mean, I can ask and I can pray. But that's subjective. I mean, how do I know I'm really getting a straight answer, or maybe I could get a private revelation or have a vision or something of the supernatural, and it would reveal to me and give me certainty, but it wouldn't give you certainty because it's not meant for you. I mean, I can tell you about it, but that's not necessarily convincing to anybody else. How does the community have certainty? This matters. This matters whether you encounter Jesus as a human being or you encounter him as something more than a human being, if you want to believe that. It depends on your encounter. So when the Marcionites were taking out all these books, the Old Testament and then from the New Testament, they were changing the encounter with Jesus. Okay? That his Jewishness in this case is the fact that he was truly Jewish and what he came from, his relationship to God. The God of the Old Testament was not his father. He was talking about this other good God who is the real God, the true God. God of the Old Testament was evil. That was not truly his. So it was misrepresenting, if you were a Christian, a right-believing Christian and not a Marcionite, it was misrepresenting Jesus' relationship to God and then your encounter with who Jesus is. It can shift how you read the sacred writing. So the teaching authority had to step in and say, no, Marcion is wrong. And it also had to step in and say, okay, we can say Marcion is wrong and give our reasons, but now we have to be positive and say, okay, so what do we believe about these sacred books? I don't want to mention them at it. Maybe I'll get to the 12 apostles. I might mention the 12 apostles later. But should I mention them now? No, I guess I'll have to. Because it gives you the source of the Magisterium. Jesus knew this. I mean, Jesus knew he was not going to be with his followers. I mean, if Jesus could have been around always, and you could just have gone to Jesus and traveled to Jesus and sat down with Jesus, had a glass of wine or something. And ask you, so pick Jesus' brain about, okay, Jesus, when you say you're the Son of God, what do you mean? And you get it straight from his mouth. Okay, that's fine. But that wasn't going to, that's just not reality. That's not how things work. Okay, Jesus knew he wasn't going to that wasn't his role. He wasn't coming to set up his kingdom forever. Eventually he will. But he also wasn't a Bible answer man. That wasn't also he wasn't a sage in that sense, which you find in other religions, where people want answers from the person. Always answers. You don't really find that in the story of Jesus. People ask Jesus questions. That comes up. So sometimes Jesus gives answers. He's not like a sage. He's not like a wisdom teacher, a wise man on the mountain that, sits there and waits for people to come up the mountain and say, oh, wise teacher, what is the meaning of life? It's not what Jesus was about. He was a teacher, but that wasn't his role, apparently. So he established a community. Again, it wasn't just about him. He wanted to make the encounter with him continue. This meeting continue. And so he took 12 guys out of his many followers, apparently, and he designated them to continue that encounter. After he would die, after his earthly ministry, his earthly period of service, and he was killed on the cross, and he rose from the dead. I can't go into all of this, the nuts and bolts of this, but hopefully you'll read about it later in the class when you read the Gospel of Mark and stuff like that. If you want to know more about it, you can take my course, Christian Faith, or take Christian Faith, period, with somebody. But Jesus rises, he comes back from the dead, and they're supposed to continue his ministry, continue the encounter with Jesus. And part of continuing that encounter was they would eventually write writings about, they would write down the stories of Jesus that they remembered or that people remembered them telling them. So these 12 men, probably symbolizing the 12 tribes of Israel, of the Jews, symbolic thing, that Jesus was kind of symbolically reestablishing the kingdom of Israel. And they are sent out. So they're apostles, they're apostello, to send away, to send forth. Apo, away from something, stello, to send. So sending away, he sends them out to extend the encounter. Now, by meeting them, you meet Jesus in some mysterious way. And you continue to meet Jesus 2,000 years later, because they have to extend the encounter, find some way to extend the encounter themselves. They have to appoint others, tell them the story, tell them what, who Jesus was and what he did, and interpret Jesus for them, and then let them go, and they pass on the story. People don't like that about, when you're reading the Bible, and maybe you've started already, and we read the Bible later, people can get, kind of worried about that with the Bible, because they don't treat the Bible that way. They don't know it's handed on, that it's an encounter with all the individuals, all the hands that passed it on, that you don't know about, that you don't know who these people were. And that can be scary, because you just know from your own experience, Mr. O'Neill, humans are not always trustworthy. You hope they are. You hope they're trying to get the story right. But they might not always. And you encounter that in the Bible as well. People trying to get the story right. Sometimes they stumble, their historical details are a little bit off, or they're not very, they don't know the science, their astronomy and or science. Modern science, but they're trying to get the story right according to the tools they have and their knowledge they have. They are sent forth with the message. John chapter 14. I guess we can read that or look at that. Let me see what most importantly. Yes, okay. Most importantly. In the case of our sacred writings, it's more than just a book. Okay, it is a book. It's literature. We've discussed that. It's a library of books written by human beings. So there's a human element to it. But that doesn't mean that can't also be a supernatural element to it. That it does come from God in some way. We'll talk more about that with revelation and inspiration. And if God is the originator, he can also be the protector of it. He can confirm it. Okay? He can make sure that the message comes through that he wants to come through. And other things maybe God doesn't care about. Like God might not care if, the person who wrote the book of Joshua, whoever that was, we don't know. They say it's Moses, but who knows? Understood that the sun did not move, that the sun was kind of basically stationary in a solar system, and that the earth was moving around it. Okay, maybe God didn't care about that. That wasn't the point of the story he was trying to get across to people. That's not the truth he was concerned about. And actually, if I wanted to be a defender of the Bible, I could say, actually, both the Bible's true and modern science is true, because the sun does move. The sun is not stationary. It's just not moving around us, but it is moving through the Milky Way galaxy, which is also moving. So we're always in constant motion. Our planet's moving, our star is moving through the galaxy, and the galaxy itself is moving through the vacuum of the universe where we don't know. It's going, so the great attractor, I think I mentioned that before. We don't know. But we're moving somewhere, always. And that could be moving. The great attractor could be moving. We don't know. too big for us to see, or too hidden for us to see. So we have teaching authority that has been promised by Jesus. Jesus, again, knows he's going, and he explains the purpose of why is he even establishing this group of men if they can get the story just as wrong as anybody else. What's the point? Why waste your time, Jesus, if they're just going to get it wrong eventually, or their successors can get it wrong? But Jesus promises them, this is in John chapter 14, in your Bibles, you want to look. And Jesus' last meal with his followers, this question, or at least this is kind of like in the back of their minds apparently. Jesus says he's going away. And they're worried about that. Because, they can't ask him questions anymore. They can't encounter him anymore. So what are they going to do? He can't hold their hand anymore. Does anyone want to? Well, we're not going to read the whole chapter. I think we'll skip to, maybe, let's see how much time we have. Maybe not so much time. Maybe we just read the chapter and I'll end with that. Does anyone have it? Does anyone want to? Go ahead. You can start with verse 1.
Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you that I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. And you know the way to the place where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will know my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Philip said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and we will be satisfied. Jesus said to him, Have I been with you all this time, Philip, and you still do not know me? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, Show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am the Father, and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own, but the Father who dwells in me so does his work. Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. But if you do not, then believe me because of the works themselves. Very truly I tell you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than these, because I am going to the Father. I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If in my name you ask me for anything, I will do.
Keep going. This is a good part. This is what we're leading up to here.
Okay. If you love me, you will keep my commandments, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to be with you forever. This is the Spirit of the truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees nor knows him. You know him because he abides with you, and he will be in you. I will not leave you orphaned. I am coming to you. In a little while the world will no longer see me, but you will see me, because I live. You also will live. On that day you will know that I am in the Father, and you in me, and I in you. They who have my commandments and keep them are those who love me, and those who love me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them and reveal myself to them. Judas said to him, Lord, how is that you will reveal yourself to us and not to the world? Jesus answered him, those who love me will keep my word, and my Father will love them, and will come to them and make our home with them. Whoever does not love me does not keep my words, and the word that you hear is not mine, but is from the Father who sent me. I have said these things to you while I am still with you, but the Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of I have said to you. Peace.
Okay, yeah, we can stop there because the rest of it is just talking about some other things. All right, just some things to point out. I'll point out some other things later on Thursday. But just notice when she was reading the encounter that's going on. It's all about encounter. You know, they're asking, Philip asks, Philip asks to see the Father. He wants to encounter God himself. And Jesus says, you have encountered him in me. You've encountered him in me. The encounter is going to end. Jesus says, I'm going to another place where you can't go. And so Thomas is like, well, why can't we go with you? You should take us with you. Show up. But it's Jesus says, I'm not going to leave you like orphans, like children without a father or mother. I will send you. Now Jesus starts talking about this other thing called an advocate or the Spirit of truth. You're going to encounter this thing, which will now enter into a relationship with that. And this Spirit of truth will talk about me and bring you into encounter with me. And through me, you'll again encounter the Father, God the Father. Okay, so think about, just a minute, think about those things if you want to. And it's all about encounter. Okay, that's what's going on in the sacred writing. And Jesus doesn't talk about the scriptures at all. He doesn't bring up the Bible or scriptures or anything. He's talking about his community. Okay, but the scriptures are going to come out of this community. So as a Christian, you're encountering it through Christ. Now, one last final thing. If you're not a spiritualist or a supernaturalist, then this doesn't make any sense to you. I mean, you're just going to read the Bible like any other book, and that's just how it's going to speak. But this is, that's not where Jesus is coming from. He's a supernaturalist. He believes, and so am I, that if you accompany the reading of the Word with the lifestyle and talking to God, that you will encounter the Spirit of truth who will lead you but in a community, not alone. You're not alone. That's why you have a teaching authority. Okay, I'll finish up, maybe say a few more things next Thursday, but I'm done. God bless you. Have a good day.
This one.